Broadcasting from the commodity capital of the world, Zurich, Switzerland, this is Insider's Guide to Energy.
This edition to Insider's Guide to Energy is brought to you by Fidectis. Go to www.fidectis.com for more information.
Welcome to Insider's Guide to Energy. I'm your host, Chris Sass, and with me this week is Selina. Selina, welcome to the program.
Hi, thank you so much.
I am so excited to have a new co-host because you are our data science expert and you are part of our new data science mini-series. So welcome to Insider's Guide. This is our audience's first chance to hear you.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm very looking forward to our mini-series.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the mini-series, but I'm really looking forward at the moment to this interview and tonight because what we're going to talk about really, I think, is fundamentally data science, but it sounds really cool. It's got space, it's got linear assets, it's saving companies money, it's doing some really neat stuff. And so I'm excited about where we're going to go. Do you have any expectations of what we should talk about tonight?
Yeah, well, I'm very excited because this is a topic that is has so much potential, I think, and all the use cases that we're going to hear about are maybe just the starting point for whatever comes with this technology.
Awesome. What we should do is we should bring our guest on. I'm going to introduce him by first name and let him murder his last name. Sven, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, my name is a little difficult. My name is Sven Przywarra, but you can call me Sven. That's absolutely fine. I'm the co-founder and co-CEO of the satellite data analytics company LiveView, and I'm super happy to be here today.
So, satellite analytics company.
Correct.
That sounds like a marketing mouthful. What exactly is a satellite analytics company?
So maybe to start a little bit with the background. Over the last few years, we've seen an explosion in number of satellites in orbit. And these satellites in orbit produce massive amounts of data about everything on the surface of the Earth, including energy assets such as overhead lines, railways, pipelines. And the thing is that the satellite images which are taken over these assets could be of great use because obviously there are a lot of insights in these images. But what we've experienced is that electrical utilities, energy providers don't really make use of satellite data, and that's where we come in. We take the satellite data and we analyze it, create actionable insights through which electrical utilities can improve their processes. And that's what we do. It's not only marketing, but it sounds pretty cool.
It did sound cool because you became a guest on the show because I read an article about what you did in all transparency, and I thought it was cool. So that is pretty cool. How do you get into this? So I've seen you've been at 30 Under 30. You're a founder. How did you find this space?
So really, originally, I was super fascinated by space from a very early age on, and I always wanted to fly to space, build my own rockets and whatnot. But then later on, when I was a teenager and when I was starting to graduate from high school, I was thinking, well, the space industry back then was so boring. Because like there were only these huge companies, especially here in Europe. In the US, there was already SpaceX, but here in Europe, there were only these huge companies. You couldn't really do anything about it. Or you couldn't really move anything forward within these companies. So I decided to study something which is a little broader, business engineering. But I was always pulled back into the space ecosystem because I was just fascinated by it. And so I started an event series here in Berlin for space companies. It's called New Space Vision. We also have events now and in the future here in Berlin, as well as our own podcast, New Space Vision. Started this community to identify ways in which I could start my own space company. And then I found my co-founder, Daniel, who had the same fascination with the topic. And what we did is we realized that, you already have a lot of satellites in space, as I already said. And we said, why is no one really making use of the data of these satellites? And this is really where we were thinking that we could make a change.
Who your co-founder is, because you gave your history and you started sharing about him.
Sure. Exactly. So I met Daniel then in 2017 through this event series which we started, and we just realized that there's not really a lot of people making use of satellite data, and so we decided, hey, why is that? And we said that we should change that. And this is why we started Live View. And then we looked around and thought, well, what's the great advantage of satellite data? It's an unlimited scale, you could say. There are, obviously, with satellite data, you can monitor vast areas of land. And what's widely distributed, what is hard to monitor? Infrastructure networks, including electrical grid, pipelines. And so we decided, hey, let's monitor these from space. And this is what we're doing ever since.
So that was your first thought, your first industry that you started to look at to be use of for them.
Yeah, so to be brutally honest, at the very beginning, we looked also at the tourism industry, but this was more to play around with the data and to get our hands dirty. But when we looked at commercial applications where we were also seeing a market demand, that was definitely the infrastructure industry. And yes, that's the first industry. We've just raised another financing round and are now about to expand into new industries. But the infrastructure industry is right now the market in which we're in.
And what are those pain points that you're started to solve for your clients? What is their problem that you can help with?
So exactly. I mean, large-scale infrastructure networks, electrical grids, pipelines, they have common problems. They have external risk factors, endangering their effective use and their effective operations. And some of them can be monitored from space, such as vegetation, ground information, and third-party applications. Just to really briefly run you through them. So obviously, trees which grow too close to overhead lines can be a risk to them. They could fall into them, and through that, either power outages could occur or wildfires could start. Both things, obviously, you want to prevent. And so right now, a lot of like monitoring methods are very manual. People walk alongside networks, fly them, or just do it on a cycle basis. And what we can do is, based on satellite imagery, we can identify where trees are, how high they are, what species they have, whether they are sick, and we can precisely point to the ones which are too close to the overhead line and are a potential risk for them. That's number one. Number two is change detection. Exactly, if you have a pipeline, you maybe want to know where construction sites are being next to them, because obviously you don't want someone build a hut next to your pipeline. And so we identify this based on satellite imagery with a high cadence, high frequency. And the third thing is ground information. So if you have a pipeline buried under the ground, what you want to do is you want to monitor how that ground is moving. And what we can do is, from space, we can monitor that with millimeters precision, how the ground is moving up and downwards.
Okay, wow, that sounds very interesting. And I'm wondering, you need a lot of data, of course, that comes from other sources. I mean, starting with the data from the satellites. So when you said early on that there are many satellites in orbit already, I mean, you don't have your own satellites. So how does that work? Where do you get the data from above?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so satellite data is exactly what we buy or get from other providers. So we don't have our own satellites. We don't have any hardware. Sometimes my co-founder is a little sad about this, as he's a hardware engineer himself, and both we share that goal to send something into
So you can
space.
start putting up your own satellites.
Exactly, we would do if it wouldn't be that expensive, and who knows, right? But right now, that's not our plan. Right now, we buy a lot of satellite data from companies which are called Planet, which are called Airbus, Maxa, some of the names you might seen over the last couple of years. But we also get a lot of data from public data sources, such as the European Space Agency's Copernicus program. What we do is we buy this data, combine this data in a unique way, and then really the magic sauce is in how we analyze the data and how we bring it to the end users.
So it sounds like there would be significant amounts of data, right? So I think when I did the pre-show with one of your marketing folks, I talked about, we recently had a guest on who wrote the book California Burning, and it talked about California wildfires and the problem that PG&E had with inspecting their power lines, right? And as you alluded to, the way it worked is they either took a helicopter or a crew had to go out, and they had regular intervals that they had to go do this. But if you're going to do this with satellite imagery, the data must be tremendous. So what magnitude of data are you talking, you're working with, and how are you handling the volume?
So we're talking about terabytes of data for individual clients. And we're right now in the process of building up a petabyte archive together with AWS. So that also is already part of the answer. How do we handle that data? We don't process any data on site, right? We have large-scale cloud cluster on AWS where we analyze, process a lot of this data, and this is really where how we are able to manage this. From day one of our company, we were all about optimization. We were all about scale, and we also want to serve customers all across the globe, as we already do. And so what we have is different data centers in North America and Europe, in the Asia Pacific region, to really serve the customers closer to them and in their home markets, in their home legislation, so where they have laws, for example, preventing data from going outside. But yeah, it's all in the cloud.
But you've learned how to handle large amounts of data. How old is your company?
So we have been founded in 2018.
And so what have you learned along the way that's unique to doing these linear assets that's a unique problem statement that maybe isn't just a big data problem?
No, I mean, so what we do is we don't do any generic data analytics. What we do is we have concrete solutions developed for a very clear target persona and target problem within the energy company, which is, for example, vegetation management, really, where we have built $6 to $7 billion every year spent on vegetation management, and we have in the US alone, and we help these utilities to really precisely and effectively manage vegetation next to their overhead lines. And it requires, for example, if you're a utility of 10,000 miles, 100,000 miles of overhead lines, what we can do is we can, with, so to say, a click of a button, obviously is a little bit more than that, get data over the entire network area, analyze it with AI, identify where vegetation is, and then generate really actionable tasks and work orders from that, which then can be used by people in the field who don't even know that the information, hey, you have to trim down this tree, is really coming from satellite data. And we've had to learn that how to translate satellite data into actionable insights on large scale very early on, as our first customer has been the German railway operator, Europe's biggest transportation company. And our first deal was to analyze the entire 20,000 miles or 33,000 kilometers of the railway network regarding vegetation. And so it was drinking from the fire hose directly from the beginning.
I can imagine. And that brings me to my next question, because I saw that part of your solution is also an app that your clients can use when looking at their own assets. But so for your analytics, for your AI, you not only use the data from satellites, but you also use data from the client, right? Because you need to know where do the railways go, or where's the grid. So I was wondering, how do you handle this probably very private or sometimes private data from your client? Because not everybody wants to share, this is where my pipeline is buried in the ground, or this is where my railway goes. Well,
100,
maybe for railways.
Yeah, 100%. So this is obviously like data privacy, data security is super important to us. And so what we really put a lot of effort and emphasis on is data security and data privacy within our system. So we've run through certification processes to assure data privacy and data security within our systems. And we make put a lot of effort into making sure that the data the customers share with us stays within the system and is only shared with the customer and no one else. And so we receive information about where the customer's infrastructure network is. So obviously you've touched on pipelines. They are maybe the infrastructure network the least amount of people know about where it's running. But generally for vegetation and overhead lines and railways, oftentimes you can see where the infrastructure network is. But regardless of that, knowing that for the entire network is critical. And so the customers share this data with us, and we make sure that it's not getting outside. Yeah.
So one of the interesting things I think that one of your colleagues had mentioned is in the vegetation, you do things, maybe know the tree height, the predicted growth, and you help prioritize or create maybe trouble tickets and help enterprise manage that. Is that true? Do I understand that correctly of some of the things you could do?
That's absolutely correct, yes.
And I guess, so how does that work in today's world? What is the value to the business? So I bring in a company such as yours, you take some satellite imagery, you monitor my entire linear asset, and you give me the vegetation. We know vegetation is a problem for power companies. You said fire outages and all the other things. how does that work? Do you use machine learning to do some predictive analytics? What would I expect as your customer, and how is that going to help my bottom line?
Yeah, so you imagine you are an electrical utility, and so what you have is 10,000 miles of overhead lines. And right now you have a vegetation management budget spent on this, where you have an annual budget, which is typically spent on a cycle, meaning that in year one, you look at one part of the of your network. In year two, another part. In year three, the third part, and so on. And then obviously you would have some certain budgets set aside for like emergency cases where you have to trim down trees which have already fallen into the network, or where someone calls an emergency case. So this is the status quo. You would have people driving there. You would have subcontractors trimming down the trees. But really the main thing is that right now you work on an assumption. The assumption that you go from A to Z in that cycle, and that this is the best method which you have at hand to make sure that no trees grow into your overhead lines. Now the thing is that we see that the world is becoming more and more dynamic. We see climate change. Through that we have changing weather conditions. We have changing patterns of vegetation growth and storms obviously becoming more and more dangerous. We also have species coming out in from other parts of the globe with completely different growth patterns. And so the cycle is really under pressure in terms of its usability in real life. Still, what's the alternative? If you don't have information about what the status of your asset is, it's super hard to make out where you should act now. And this is really the gap which we are filling with LiveView. We're helping the utility to identify precisely where actions have to be taken, not just like because it is now 4 years since you have been to this place the last time, but because we see on the satellite image that there's an action needed there. And with that, we help to improve the efficiency of these processes. B, we have to be more effective in such a way that we have to prevent power outages, and we have to prevent any kind of danger to the network. And then obviously all of that in the end ends up in the bottom line, right? How much money do you have to spend? If you are more efficient, you maybe have to spend less. Maybe you want to spend the same amount, but you want to achieve more. And if you're more effective and can prevent any damages to your network, you're also safe because you don't have any capex spending, right? And maybe you want to exactly. But this is what we're doing. This is how we're helping the bottom line as well as the end customer in the end, which has more reliable network. Yeah.
So you started this company 4 years ago, if I understood correctly. So it's pretty new, and I mean everything you do hasn't been here and hasn't been possible like 10 years, 15 years ago. So I was wondering, how do your clients react? I mean, of course they have to start trusting what you do. So maybe I could imagine they're not completely going away from their cycle-based maintenance, but maybe just try your solution for a part of their assets, or maybe just starting to shift from the cycle based.
Yeah.
Is that what happens?
Absolutely. So first of all, I think like podcasts like this are so important for the energy industry, just because the energy industry right now is going through a transition which is without parallels, right? We have climate change, which we want to fight. We have changing population patterns across the globe, and then we have exactly all the different kind of energy transition. So it's incredible important that the energy industry, and I see this every day, is changing, becoming more and more innovative. And obviously taking a jump from a cycle-based approach completely to a satellite-based approach, which sounds like it's coming straight from science fiction, is a big leap of faith for a lot of employees at utilities. So we try to help them with making that decision, and making also a decision which they can argue internally. And so what we do is we run in our sales process, we run a POC at the very beginning, where we take not maybe the entire 10,000 miles of their overhead line, but we maybe take 100 or 1,000 miles, and we analyze that. We provide the insights to their customer base, to their employees. We have a validation process. We on scientific measures really show on site how good our analysis is, and this gives them the proof and the confidence to roll that out, and that's what we're doing.
Okay, and more technically speaking, how do you train your models? Because there won't be a data set. Okay, this is all the fallen trees on networks in the last 5 years here with, I don't know, latitude data. So how do you train those models with what?
Yeah, obviously this is part of our secret sauce. So
Of
without
course.
giving without giving too much information away, training our machine learning algorithms and creating the necessary training data for that is one part of where we put a lot of effort in, and we've innovated, I think, a lot in the last couple of years. But yeah, generating training data is not easy and not easy to come by. But we've solved that, and we believe that we have solved it also on large scale. It has a human element to it for sure, as we don't get around. First creating the material through which you train your machine learning model, but we've automized as much as we can. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I buy that you're automating, that you're learning and getting there. We spent a lot of the interview so far talking about vegetation, but that was only one of three components that we started the interview talking about. So maybe you can shed a little light on maybe what you do with pipeline and what the value add is. I mean, obviously building a hut's a pretty easy comparing, or easier, I think, than some of your other uses. What are some of the more advanced capabilities you have for, let's say, a pipeline?
Yeah, so exactly. I think so we have two additional categories of our offering. One is change detection. The other one is ground information analysis. I will dive a little deeper into change detection first. So within change detection, we have kind of two segments, right? One is the rapid change detection analytics, which is really important when you need direct insights about your infrastructure grid within hours after an event. We call this near real-time monitoring. And we provide this to electrical utilities and other utilities such as railway operators or pipeline operators, where we help them to precisely identify where something has changed alongside their infrastructure network right after a storm. For example, we help the German railway operator to identify precisely after a storm where a tree has fallen onto the network within hours. Right now, this is not possible because right after a storm, it's difficult to fly. Maybe you don't have the right planes and whatnot. So we can do this from space. And then there's another aspect to change detection, which is slower changes, such as construction sites. So obviously, if you have a pipeline buried underground, some people just don't know. Other people don't care that there's a pipeline. And what they do is they build something next to it. And right now, pipeline operators have the obviously interest and also the obligation to know where that's happening. And so right now they fly on a cycle their pipelines to identify where things are being built next or on top of these pipelines to then stop these activities. And what we do is based on satellite imagery, especially for more rural areas or as an addition to the plane flights, we provide insights on a frequent basis, identifying where changes have occurred next to the pipeline. That's the change detection kind of piece.
Do you also take drone data or plane data? I mean, satellite is just data at the end of the day, right? It's just imagery.
Correct.
So do you take imagery currently from drones and planes as well and use it, or only satellite at the moment?
So we have used and analyzed big amounts of satellite and of drone and aerial data. The thing is that we are all about scale, and we are all about bringing really a good solution to the end user. The thing with drones and planes is that oftentimes you're working with local vendors or with local kind of setups. Every plane with a camera has maybe a different camera attached to it. Every plane with a camera is maybe flying at a different altitude. Well, everyone who's like trained in machine learning algorithm knows that obviously all these changes make it more difficult to produce reliable results. And so we say, first one, what we do is we focus on satellite data analytics. But yeah, we have analyzed aerial and drones, and we will continue to do so in the future, even more so than we do today.
Okay. The third branch, the ground deformation, is more about natural catastrophes, or what could I understand from that?
Yeah, it's more about natural changes, absolutely. So what we're looking here at is monitoring how the Earth underneath of railway tracks and pipelines and other types of infrastructure, such as electrical lines, is moving up and downwards. This mainly has natural reasons. For example, washout from waterways or geological reasons, but also could be a mine, an underground mine underneath an area could be a reason, as you see it in some historic mining areas in all over Europe and North America, where you have underneath mines which people forgot about it, and suddenly the earth is moving down. What we can do, and this is I think super incredible, satellite imagery, radar imagery allows you to monitor the movement of the earth up and downwards with millimeters precision, based on something which is called INSA analysis. And this is what we do, and we help the operators of pipelines, for example, to identify where that's happening, and to make sure that it's not really affecting the pipeline or the railway negatively.
Okay. Monitoring trees and vegetation and monitoring the surface of the earth going up and down is probably a huge different approach that you have to take. Maybe you can shed some light on the different approaches for the different branches that you're working on.
You're absolutely right when saying that they are different in terms of the analytics which we use, right? So we use obviously machine learning as well as other types of analytical processes for both these things, where it's all the same. It's okay, how do we make use of the data? How do we access data? How do we scale processing? And how do we bring this to the end user? We have a unified front end, web app, mobile application, ArcGIS integration, SAP integration, and so forth, for which users can really make use of the data. And that's one of the big gaps, I think, in a lot of AI and analytics software. How do end users really make use of the data? So the middle part, where it's about processing, this is different, and there we have built up unique, proprietary software applications to monitor with machine learning vegetation, with machine learning change detection, and with machine learning and other types of analytics, ground information analytics. And we have separate teams for this.
Just a general question: how big is your team with everything that's going on?
So we are a little bit more than 100 people across three offices. We have one office in Latvia, one office in Berlin, and one office in North America.
Okay. I have another question, because with the satellite imagery and all the potential that it has, I would think that your clients are able to monitor regions at a lower cost than they used to, and maybe the cycles that they chose to use before in those remote or difficult accessible areas were lower than they should have. Not that they should be, but now they have the possibility to monitor this much more closely and more frequently. And my question is there any change in behavior of your clients that you have experienced? Because with the lower risk or the better risk management that they can do with your solution, maybe they're doing something different when it comes to investing in those areas or something.
Yeah, I mean, this is the big promise, right? And this is what we're working on together with our clients, right? To walk this path. As we said, we are 4 years old, and we are in rollout when we have customers using our solution. I mean, then taking exactly this next step of where to make investment is the one which comes afterwards, and this is what we're gonna see in the next couple of years. But as you know, the energy industry is sometimes moving a little slowly, so we are still working on that together with our clients.
I see the transition taking place. I see new and emerging technologies, much like yourselves. I think there's a couple of competitors that do similar things to what you do. I guess telling me that you're 4 years old, one of the things that I would think a data set would give you is a nice trend analysis and some tools that we don't necessarily have today, and maybe predictive tools. So if you look over multi years of data, how does that change the process, or what are you anticipating or hypothesizing that this data could do? So let's say I had 10 years of data from you guys. Is there things that I'm going to know that I don't know today from the old process, or maybe with the scale of data that a human can't just pull out of the data because it's just too much data?
No, I mean, even from day one, you will be able to drive change, right? So exactly from day one, as to come back to the example I've just given, where you have a 4 year cycle, right? And you use live view, and you get every year you get information. You get it like 4 times compared to your initial kind of process, right? And this drives behavior, this drives change, because it really helps you to make a decision where to go today, and what to do based on this grid-wide overview. If you have 10 years or even like 2 years, 3 years, you can really see maybe patterns showing up in terms of where vegetation has a bigger problem, or where changes occur maybe more often, and where you want to maybe also move to a different kind of solution, meaning having drones or having a person on site for that exact area, making sure that no one is building a construction site or is building a hut in that part of your pipeline. But these patterns become visible from day one. Then driving conclusions from that obviously sometimes comes with time. But we try to give our customers all the tools they need to drive these conclusions, which sometimes require context, regional context sometimes just people on site can have. So we have a set of web app and mobile app and other integrations, which really give the insights of satellite data into the hands of normal people which are working on site, which are really like making the maintenance or conducting the maintenance alongside these assets, which have nothing to do with satellite data, which have nothing to do with analytics. And we enable them to be more efficient for these insights, which, by the way, in our web app and our mobile app, you wouldn't know that they would come from satellite data. They could come from a different data source.
No, but I get that, right? I mean, that to me makes all the sense in the world. You put the tools in their hand and they can work differently. But I think of it this way: as a technologist and spent my career in technology, is usually a new technology becomes fundamental to, let's say, the next killer app, right? So when you start this company, you say, hey, great, we're going to solve this problem. We're going to have lots of data. Now we've got this huge corpus of data to work with. And we can start doing some other things that maybe we didn't anticipate. So 4 years in, you probably have, you said you're going to petabytes of data, you're going to have a lot of things to work with. Is there a killer app in the horizon in your vision from being 4 years in, or is there a killer use of the technology that it wasn't designed for, that you unexpectedly are come across so far?
I think nothing unexpected. I think every day we are facing another problem or another area, maybe in the energy industry, but also outside of that, where we believe that satellite data could be a great part of the solution to solving that. Speaking about, like, for example, the forestry sector, in which we currently are looking into, the insurance sector, the logistics sector, and all of that, where we see solutions and where we see how our technology, which originally was built for the infrastructure sector, could be very helpful. And so this is also like the goal of our company long term, to monitor 1 billion assets across industries.
How do you organize the flow of information from your clients coming back? Because you mentioned you have the mobile app, so the people on the ground really checking on the incidents that have been raised. They have the app and they put in what they see. How is that organized? Because I can imagine, maybe that's just, it's not going to be a free text field, but how to organize the data to make it scalable and make the flow back to your validation and your models.
Yeah, we have a couple of UI designers and UI developers, which make sure that it's nice and handy and not a free field. So we have a questionnaire. We have the ability to put in pictures, voice messages, videos, everything which makes sense. And then we store it connected to, obviously, the asset which they were looking at. I love geospatial data because everything is connected to everything else through a location, right? And we also obviously have this feedback cycle where we have satellite data top down and bottoms up. We have the field view, and we connect that on a map through our web app, through our mobile app, which provides this on-site data. And this is how we do it.
And on what map data, geospatial data, are you based? I mean, usually everybody knows Google Maps, but you need just probably street data to be able to see the entire picture. So what is your source there, just for the the normal mapping?
So we just use something similar to Google Maps, which is Mapbox, which is a mapping framework used by, for example, Uber, which is just a baseline map. On top of that, it's the satellite data analytics, which we create ourselves.
Okay.
So far, it's been interesting. I guess that on the business side, let's talk a little bit about the business. So you solve a business problem. You just said you went through a round of funding. Where does this go from here? So are you in that growth mode? Are you still in the vetting mode? Where's the company at?
So yeah, exactly. I think like we're absolutely in the growth mode. We believe that we are, and we see that every day. We're scaling our processes internally. Why? Because our customers are asking for that. Because we see the customer demand, we see the customers' projects coming in. We have customers on every continent of the earth, and this just shows the great advantage of satellite data, that it's really largely scalable. And this is where we are at right now. We've just closed the financing round, giving us the ability to accelerate our growth path and growth trajectory. And we're now expanding our teams. So if anyone out there listening to this podcast is looking for an exciting job in sales, business development, or any tech position, we have a lot of positions online.
Well, great for the commercial, I guess. But what I wonder then is, what's the ecosystem? So we talked about your app, and you said, "Hey, we're going to connect." So if I've got a trouble, ticket system or some other things, what kind of partnership and ecosystem do you have to really get full advantage of your platform?
So the good thing is that we implement with like the factor standards of a lot of the energy industry, at least as we perceive it. So we have an S3 integration. ArcGIS obviously is one of the tools being used by most energy utilities as well as other companies. We have an integration there. We have an integration into SAP, which is also quite widely used in the energy industry. And what we have is a dedicated team providing unique APIs, right? If you're talking to an energy operator, an energy utility, sometimes they use out-of-the-box solution, as mentioned. Sometimes they have their own home-built stuff. Then you still want to integrate, but we have a team which can sort these things out. So really, but even without any internal systems, you can take full advantage of our solution through our own applications, right?
All right. So get the integration now. Now, the kind of dumb question that comes to mind is, earlier you mentioned that typically, let's say there was a weather emergency or some sort of catastrophic event, and you said, well, we can get answers in hours. I believe you're in Germany, which is not the sunniest country I've ever been in. Not always clear sky in hours. So how reliable are satellites in that situation? So I get it on a perfect day that there's a problem that happens and it's a clear blue sky day, no problem. What's the percentage of coverage and how quickly can you get there? Because that to me could be a conceivable for real time data. If it's near real time, less of a problem. But if I want to monitor after a snowstorm, there might still be clouds in the sky or something like that.
100%, and we just monitored through a snowstorm this winter. So the thing is, what we use for that is radar. Radar imagery doesn't have the disadvantage that it is being blocked by clouds, but it can see through clouds. And this is the beautiful thing about that data source. It comes at a price, yeah, but when time is of essence, so radar data comes to your help, you could say. And this is what we do. We procure radar data, which is a radio wave which penetrates clouds, which in the end, the satellite image coming from a radar satellite looks very, very different from an optical satellite. But we take this data in, process it, and in the end, translate it into actionable insights. So we don't have that problem. For the other types of solution, which I've just mentioned, we mainly use optical data, as it provides more context and more ways to analyze than the radar data. But as said, on the contrary, radar data is capable of providing you insights no matter what time of day, no matter what weather conditions.
So for the emergency case.
Exactly, in an emergency case, yeah.
Okay. So it seems like pretty cool stuff. You haven't let me down based on my expectations so far of what we're going to talk about. We've talked about satellites, imagery, projections, all the cool things you can do with it. I guess what I'd want to know is, what are some of the lessons you've learned, or what did you think? What assumptions did you have going into this business that didn't prove out? Like what has changed from in starting a business? We had some assumptions 4 years ago, right?
Yeah, sure.
What were some of the erroneous assumptions?
I think it can't be that hard to sell into the energy industry. Well, that was the first assumption I've had. I was proven wrong. It's very hard to sell into the energy industry, as maybe some of your listeners know, maybe sitting on either side of the table in that kind of discussions. So selling into the energy industry is something which is painful, which takes a long time, but obviously it's also very rewarding once you have worked with a customer or once you are working with a customer, because customers in the energy industry also are very open. They love to cooperate on also new developments. But yeah, selling in the energy industry is hard. The other thing is, well, satellite data can't be that hard. Well, it is very hard if you're talking about analyzing data at scale. And at LiveView, we were at day one about automating and scaling satellite data, because our goal is to support all infrastructure grid operators globally, which have to maintain, in the end, the modern backbone of our modern industrial society. We want to support them with satellite data analytics. And as I said, long term, we want to monitor 1 billion assets globally. It only works if you put all your emphasis on automating and scaling. And that's quite difficult. And we, at the beginning, were a little bit naive in thinking, well, we just need a couple of engineers and we can do it. As I said, we're 100 people, most of them being engineers, and they have cracked the code when it comes to satellite data analytics. But it has been a journey to get to that point.
I totally believe that. And looking at the other side of the table, your clients, what is their feedback? What was their biggest surprise maybe when started working with your solution?
Yeah. I think and you already pointed to that. At the beginning, electrical utilities or infrastructure grid operators are rightfully cautious about like what kind of solutions they want to work with. In the end, I mean, they make sure that here the lights on and we can record this podcast, right? But I think like once they have like came over this first barrier, this first hurdle of trusting the solution enough to test it out, I think they very, very quickly were very amazed and surprised about like the large scale kind of insights they've gotten. So we've always gotten very positive feedback. The head of operations at Deutsche Bahn, who has a budget of multiple $billion, said, well, the solution of satellite of LiveView helps us to make sure that we can provide better service to our customers, that our operations are better. Our electrical grid customers are very open in terms of communicating how well that works out. So I think like we have a couple of, so our customers are generally very excited about the opportunities which they already see live in action and will see in the future.
Well, I don't have any other questions. Selina, do you want to ask a final question as we wind up the show?
No, I think we're all good. That was very interesting.
For me, I think the use of data is really powerful. I agree with you working in the energy industry that it can be hard to introduce in. It can be hard to get people to change from legacy process. But what I do see is, based on the current environment and where people are, a need to do this. And vegetation, I just know from an energy perspective, is a huge problem. And it's a costly one. So if there's significant savings and better predictability, and you can automate and reduce the cycles, I can't see that not inherently being successful at some point once it's vetted out. And as you've got experience and get customers vetted out, I would think that would take off and be important to the industry. I want to thank you for sharing your story. Definitely enjoyed hearing about your journey of how you started a company and get into space. You say not everybody can get into space. I think you've even had a neighbor that has a space company that does low Earth orbit satellites. So I think it's probably more popular than maybe you think, because it's big business as well. But it's really cool to see you using the data. But to me, it's more a data story than just a space story, because it's just images that you're working with and doing data science here is what I think your company is from the cheap seats.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks very much for having me. It was a pleasure talking to you. And exactly, I said, I think it's great what you're doing here with the podcast. And I believe that the energy industry is going through such an interesting change that it needs a lot of smart brains to work on the problems we have ahead of us.
Well, thank you for being a guest. What we will probably do is in about 6 to 12 months, we'll bring you back and see how this is all playing out, if you're willing to come back on the show, because I like to see, we do a segment called Where Are They Now? And we bring guests back about a year later and see what's transpired in their predictions. So the last question I have for you is, 5 years from now, where are you guys?
So 5 years from now, that's a great question. So where we are in 5 years, we are the globes, the leading Earth observation analytics company on the Earth. We have major offices in North America and Europe, as well as in Asia Pacific. We will have expanded into more than just the energy industry, but having expanded to a handful, maybe a dozen of different industry. And what we have done is we have opened up the architecture, which we have, to other people building on top of that one, to bring satellite data analytics to customers across all industries.
Well, awesome. I wish you well on the journey. I look forward to touching base with you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For our audience, this has been another episode of Insider's Guide to Energy. This kicks off our data science focus. Tune in to the data science mini-series. You're going to hear a lot more content on data science and all the cool things you can do with machine learning, AI, and how it can help the business and where it's going. We'll talk to you soon and talk to you again next week. Bye-bye.